A medieval feast, written and illustrated by Aliki. It was announced from the palace that the king would soon make a long journey. On the way to his destination, the king and his party would spend a few nights at Camdenton Manor. The lord of the manor knew what this meant. The king traveled with his queen, his knights, squires, and other members of his court. There could be 100 mouths to feed. Preparations for the visit began at once. The lord and lady of the manor had their serfs to help them. The serfs lived in huts provided for them on the lord's estate, each with its own plot of land. In return, they were bound to serve the lord. They farmed his land, managed the manor house, and if there was a war, they had to go to battle with the lord and the king. But now they prepared. The manor had its own church, which was attended by everyone on the estate. The royal suite was redecorated. Silk was spun, new fabric was woven. The royal crest was embroidered on linen and painted on the king's chair. The manor house had to be cleaned, the rooms readied, tents set up for the horsemen, fields fenced for the horses, and above all, provisions had to be gathered for the great feast. Hunting was a sport for the rich only. The wild animals that lived on the lord's estate belonged to him. Anyone caught poaching, hunting illegally, was severely punished. The lord and his party went hunting and hawking for fresh meat. Falcons and hawks were prized as pets. They were trained to attack birds for their masters to capture. They trapped rabbits and birds of all kinds and fished for salmon and eels and trout. Serfs hid in bushes and caught birds in traps. They set ferrets into burrows to chase out rabbits. There were fruits and vegetables growing in the garden, herbs and flowers for sauces and salads, and bees made honey for sweetening. Grains were ground into flour at the lord's mill and baked into trenchers and other breads. Trenchers were flat, coarse bread used in place of plates. Peasants ate theirs, but the rich gave their trenchers to the poor. Other breads were made of the finest flour. Butter was churned, cheese was made, and ale and wines were ready in the brew house. Ale was brewed from barley, oats, and wheat. Wines were made from grapes, often flavored with herbs and flowers. The king was almost there. The food was prepared in the great kitchen. There were many cooks and scullion boys to help them. The kitchen was a separate stone structure built on to the main house. It was connected by a long passageway to the great hall where the feast would take place. There were cupboards along the way to store the prepared food. Pigs and deer and wild boar turned on spits. Great pots of salted meat were boiled into stews, seasoned with spices only the rich lords could afford. Swans and geese, heron and quail were roasted. So was a rare beast called a cockatrice. It was really a capon, a rooster, and a suckling pig that were cut in half, stuffed, and sewn together again, each to the other's half. A peacock was cooked, then reassembled with its feathers, and 24 blackbirds were baked in a pie. By the time the king and his party arrived, everything was ready. Tables and benches were set up along the sides of the hall. A fire blazed in the center, and tapestries covered the damp stone walls. The high table stood on a raised platform. Near it was a display of the Lord's finest gold vessels. The guests swarmed into the great hall at 10:30 in the morning. Trumpets announced the king, who sat at the high table with his hosts and other honored guests. They washed their hands in scented water and wiped them dry in a clean towel. The bishop chanted grace. Then they ate and ate and ate. The panter brought in the king's breads, trenchers, and salt cellar. The ewerer tasted the water before he poured it over the king's hands. Trumpets from the gallery sounded the start of the feast. There were no forks, but napkins were provided. They shared goblets of wine, and between courses the ewerer appeared with water for them to wash their fingers. They ate some of their food with spoons. The rest they ate with their fingers. They cut pieces from the meat the carver put on their trenchers with the knives they had brought with them. They used their little finger to sprinkle salt on their food. Drums beat and trumpets sounded as one surprise followed another. They ate meat pies and fish tarts and thick soups called igerdus and buchenad. They ate boar's head and cow's tongue and pudding de swan neck. They ate a whole castle molded out of pastry, stuffed with meat, eggs, fruits, and nuts, and wondered how they managed. Sweet and spicy sauces dripped into their trenchers as jesters, jugglers, and minstrels entertained them. Course followed course, each ending with a fancy marzipan sculpture called a subtlety. After the guests admired them, they ate those too. They ate and ate until dark. It was a feast fit for a king, and there would be more tomorrow. The end. This medieval feast took place toward the end of the Middle Ages, about 1400. It is fictitious, but it could have happened in real life, somewhere in England perhaps. When the king announced he would visit, the Lord was shaken. The expense of the preparations could cost him his fortune. It had happened to others, but he had no choice. At least the Lord could be glad it was summer and there was fresh food. In the winter, there would have been few vegetables and little fresh meat. Farm animals were killed in late autumn as there was not enough feed to last them through the winter. The meat was preserved in salt or smoked and eaten in stews during the cold months when people could not hunt. Though stews were served at this banquet, the fresh meat, fish, and fowl were far more welcome. Medieval feasting was an art. Cooks not only prepared delicious food, They used their wild imaginations as well. They molded pastry into castles, sculptured desserts into kings and queens and elaborate scenes, all decorated with food paints. Live jugglers jumped out of puddings. Birds were baked in pies. But sometimes live blackbirds were hidden in the pie to fly out at astonished guests. Each new dish was announced by trumpets and drums, and in between there was music and song. The Lord did his best. The king was given a feast to remember.